The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and can you hear me? We're good? Okay. Alright guys. Hello everyone, and welcome to Origin and Cause's webinar titled Extracting Data from Vehicles to Describe What Really Happened. My name is George Costandi, and I'll be your moderator today. I was actually just looking at the attendees list, and I see that we have representation or people attending from every single province in Canada, which is awesome. And also we have several people from the States, so welcome everyone. We're really excited about the webinar that we prepared for you all. I just wanted to go through a couple of quick points with you first. If you have joined us through your computer to see the slides, you'll notice the GoToWebinar console on the top right of your webinar screen. Through the question feature, we encourage you to type and submit your questions. All questions will be anonymously addressed, unless you wish for your identity to be mentioned. If so, just write your name and your company name as well if you wish, then put in your question or your comment. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but on how much time is left over at the end of the presentation, of course. If we don't get to your question in the webinar, we promise to follow up with you after the fact to make sure that your questions or your comments are answered and addressed. Throughout the webinar, if you need any sort of support or if you can no longer hear or something like that, you could email us at webinar@origin-and-cause.com. And for those who are tuning in just by telephone and can't see the slides, if you want to submit questions, please do so in the same manner, emailing us at webinar@origin-and-cause.com. And of course, please join in on the conversation on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @origin_cause and hashtag OC webinar. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker to you. Russ Colosi is a forensic investigator with over 20 years of experience. Russ specializes in forensic, mechanical, and fire investigations involving heavy vehicles, trucks, and large diesel engines, including vehicle failure analysis and electronic data extraction, which is what we will be talking about today. Russ also served as a firefighter with the Thorold Fire Department for 7 years. And without further ado, I'll pass on the mic to Russ Colosi.
Thanks, George, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a subject I'm very passionate about and enjoy talking about. Okay, let's jump right into the presentation, and we're going to start with a pop quiz. These are 3 different types of vehicles: a plane, a passenger vehicle, and a truck. I'd like to ask you a simple question about the black boxes in each of them. How many event data recorders are in a plane? A polling tool will pop up on your screen. Click on the answer you think is right, and we'll share the results. We'll give it a few more seconds. Okay. So most of you said 3. The answer is 1. Now that's a general answer, of course. I don't know a whole lot about passenger planes, but I know that some have more or less. But the fact is there's a single point of recording in a plane. Next. How many event data recorders are in a passenger vehicle? Again, the poll will pop up and you can answer the best that you think. Wow, I'm impressed. So the answers are coming in. Okay, we'll share the poll answers with you now. So most of you answered 1, and about 20% of you answered 3. The actual answer is 1. So the mandated box in a passenger vehicle is centrally located, usually somewhere between the seats or sometimes a little more forward depending on the weight of the vehicle. Next, how many event data recorders are in trucks? The polls popped up. Just give it your best shot. I'm really encouraged by the result amount of people that are, there are a lot of you who are selecting answers, and we appreciate that feedback. Okay, I think we're ready to share. And well, most of you actually answered, 70% of you answered 1, and 24% of you answered 3. The answer? 6. So the term black box has become popular because they're used on planes to record specific data relating to all operations of the plane. The correct term in vehicles is not black box. It's event data recorder. But people tend to use the term black box because it's widely understood. The primary purpose of an EDR in a passenger vehicle is to deploy the airbag system. Recently added features mandated by the government record conditions leading to the event. Similarly, the main purpose of EDRs in trucks are to operate major components such as the engine, the transmission, and the brake system. Their secondary features are to record certain events such as hard stops and failures. So I want to make it clear that this technology is designed to make sure the vehicle is operating correctly, and we use these features and the recorded data in the software for our purposes to answer questions after a loss takes place. What's an EDR look like? Generally, they're located centrally in a car. You can see it here beside the handbrake between the front seats. As you can see, it has a metal casing with 2 plugs, and it's bolted to the floor of the vehicle. They are bolted to the vehicle because they have to measure the actions of the vehicle as far as different velocity changes, and it also has to be made of metal to survive the average crash. In trucks, this is one of the EDRs. This EDR is actually bolted to the side of an engine. It belongs to the engine manufacturer, and it's supplied with the engine when the truck is made. So the software inside this EDR is generally and specifically made to run the engine, but it has the ability to record some crash parameters, if not many in some. On your screen is a common transmission controller. So in the circle is the controller, which is bolted to the top of a truck transmission. It's supplied by the truck transmission manufacturer. And if you look closely, in this photograph, I'm actually wired and extracting data for a file. In cars, we can extract data to indicate several parameters in the following. We can extract the vehicle speed. This is basic information you need for most claims. You're best positioned in your investigation when you know how fast the vehicle is going. We record the fuel pedal position. This tells us if the driver had their foot on the gas or not, and to what extent. It'll give a percentage of how much the fuel was depressed at the time of the crash and leading up to it. This is very useful because sometimes drivers say they were driving cautiously, but the data might show there was a sudden acceleration. For example, if someone is trying to make a quick left turn before oncoming traffic gets closer, we see these all the time where they think the cars are not, they're a lot further than they actually are. You'll see the brake pedal position. This is extremely useful in losses when the insured claims they were slamming on the brakes, but nothing happened. It records ignition cycles, on-off cycles. This data tells me how many times the ignition was turned on and off. It's useful to determine if there's a staged event or multiple accidents, and to verify the chain of events. The EDR will record seatbelt status. It simply tells us if the driver and the passenger were belted or not, but some cars will report even to the weight of the passenger, so an adult versus a child. The EDR will give a detail of the airbag deployment, so it's going to, one, confirm the airbags have been deployed, but it'll also tell us when in the event that happened in milliseconds. There's going to be the opportunity to record multiple crash events, and this is really cool information. This EDR records if multiple crashes took place. So say somebody got sideswiped first and then hit another vehicle. Those are different events and they're recorded. There's going to be a recording of the change of velocity. So when the vehicle hit something, the velocity changed from driving to not driving. It's going to be incredible information to add to an in-depth accident reconstruction, and biomechanics are going to find this invaluable information when they're trying to evaluate the severity of injuries. EDR information is routinely reviewed by manufacturers to address trends. General Motors used EDR data in their key switch recall investigations. As well, Toyota reviewed similar data when they investigated their floor mat to pedal interference recall. What's amazing about this data is that the recorders document the status of all things prior, during, and after the crash. So it tells the full story, firsthand, of key actions going on inside the vehicle, and adjusters and lawyers love it because this data really helps their claims and legal proceedings a lot. In trucks, considering there are several EDRs throughout the vehicle, data is a lot more specific. We're able to download data from each recorder which explains each component and what it was doing independently. Then we put the data together to explain a chain of events. This is extremely important because the nature of the truck losses can be more complicated. They involve very different types of claimants, circumstances, and they're often very costly. So we're very fortunate to have this great wealth of data available to us when we investigate a claim. Since we're dealing with the transportation of goods and money, this introduces a different variable to the claim. For example, the commercial driver is evaluated on their driving performance. So the desire to falsely change internal settings on commercial EDRs increases when speed reporting can impact the driver financially. Here's the caveat. As you can see, trucks have the potential to give you a lot more information, but every truck is different and provides different types of data depending on who built it and to what specs. Let me explain a little bit about that with an illustration. Say we're going to buy a car. So you buy a Ford. When you buy a Ford car, you get a Ford engine. You get Ford brakes. You get a Ford transmission. Everybody's happy. We're all working together. But when you buy a truck, say you buy a Freightliner, first the salesman asks, what brand of engine do you want? Do you want a Mercedes? Do you want a Cummins, Cat, Detroit? What kind of brakes do you want? Do you want a Wabco brake system or do you want Bendix brake system? They have different features, roll stability, and different ABS systems that you might be interested in. Which brand of transmission do you want? Do you want a Meritor? Do you want an Allison? Maybe you want an Eaton Ultra Shift? And the EDRs for these brands communicate in different languages, native to their manufacturer. There's no standard way the data is recorded in a component. They're all very different and have own proprietary software. There are only a few forensic engineering firms in Canada that have the ability to communicate with all these brands. Origin and Cause being one of them. Sorry for the shameless plug, but we did put a lot of investment into this. The reason there's not many companies that do this internally in Canada is because it is a significant investment in software and training. Since there's such a high demand for our clients, we offer this service in-house. Here's the million-dollar question. How can data from an EDR help my claim and the investigation into any kind of legal case? Put simply, event data recorders provide facts of what took place before, during, and after the event, which ultimately helps the claim or litigation process. The way I see it, not recovering this data is like ignoring a witness statement. Event data recorders are witnesses. They remember what happened. In fact, they're the most reliable, unbiased types of witnesses you could ever ask for. Every file that hits your desk involving a vehicle, you need to get this information as soon as possible. Why as soon as possible? Data helps you control your claim administration better. We might identify third parties or find an immediate need to preserve vehicles. Or, if you have a liability exposure, this data alerts you to it right away. For example, if your driver drives through a stop sign, you should know that. If your driver took on a curve too fast, you should know that. You should, or you could, verify facts in driver statements. If your driver really was just sitting there, you should know. If there was 2 accidents like they said there was, you should know. If your driver swears to have slammed on the brakes, but the car kept going, man, you should know that too. The information available to you through data extraction is incredible and valuable. The optimal time to download the data from an EDR is while it's still in the vehicle, still in its perch, still connected to the wiring. So a lot of times our clients call us right after the loss took place and let us know exactly where the vehicle is before it's scrapped. That allows us for visual confirmation of things like tire size and other mechanical aspects that paint a more vivid picture for us when interpreting the data. What's not so helpful is when a client calls me at 6 months later after a loss and tells me to pick up the box, and the truck has been scrapped already. This puts the claim in a position of weakness because I can connect the physical details of the vehicle with the recorded data. If the vehicle is gone, all we have is the data, which is less compelling when scrutinized. I'm not saying that it's absolutely useless information. You don't have to access, if you don't have access to the car or truck, it just doesn't have the same forensic strength as data verified by a physical examination. I'll give you an example. Let's say that there's a cool Ford F-150 4x4, and the owner put these really expensive oversized tires on it. Since the tire size difference is more than the size that's programmed into the EDR, the speed data will be reported wrong. Now, most people that own 4x4s with big tires, they don't mind that difference, but when the truck has been in a crash, we want to know the real speed that the vehicle was going. So we need to know the real tire size. We can calculate the actual vehicle speed if we know that size. Therefore, the sooner you get us involved in the investigation, the better for everyone. I'll go on site, plug into the EDRs, and extract the data, and do a physical examination to document attributes like tire size and gear ratios relevant to the data. I'm usually out within a day or two of the call, and I'm pretty quick. Another key point I want to mention is that the timing of your request to obtain the data. Say the vehicle with the data belongs to a third party. Make sure you request access to that data of the third-party vehicle as soon as possible. This ensures the preservation of the vehicle and the EDRs. If the vehicle's been discarded because the third party didn't see the value in holding on to it, then you ask for the data, you're out of luck. By asking for access to the data right away, you're making your interest known to the third party, which encourages them to preserve the evidence for you. Here's a photo of data extraction in action from a passenger vehicle that was in a crash. We'll talk about this interesting case later. I just want to point out the equipment in the middle, the EDR translator, as well as the cable connected to the data port in front of the driver's seat, and a cable connected to the laptop in the back seat because the front seat was destroyed. The car was totaled, but I was able to reconstruct the data wiring at the front of the vehicle and perform the extraction. It wasn't the biggest case in the world, and it did keep the EDR in the vehicle and intact, so it was easier to extract the data. The alternative would be to remove the box, take it back to the lab, and connect to it on a bench. Okay, who owns the data? This technology is just starting to be used in Canada, so I expect more guidelines will be developed within the next few years about this topic. Presently, the best practice is to get permission from the owner of the vehicle before extracting any data, and we do that in all our investigations, mandatory. We continue to reach out to our legal partners and friends seeking guidance on this, but there isn't much out there in Canada. I think it's a great topic of discussion, and maybe through the question and answer portion of this webinar, if you have any comments relating to this, I welcome to bring them up. We have a few people tuning in from the US today, so if you guys have anything to add about the data ownership in the States, feel free to let us know. How long does one of these investigations take? From time to time, we receive requests to investigate. To the time we submit a report to our clients, it's usually about a week. The steps come down to locating the vehicle, getting permission from the owner, going on site to look at the vehicle, and completing an investigation which takes a few hours per EDR. Depending on the amount of damage to the vehicle, we may have to reconstruct some wiring, provide power, things like that. Then I go back to the office, analyze the data to get an understanding of what really happened. Sometimes clients contact me to simply extract the data and hold on to it in case they might need it in the future. If you ever know what information, you'll never know what information you'll need in the future. On that case, there might be litigation 2 hours or 2 years down the road waiting to come in. So it's good to have it locked down and in a database, which is great for the future. What do I need from adjusters or lawyers? Once you've realized data extraction is appropriate for the claim, you need to secure the first-party vehicle right away. Plus, you should notify third parties of your interest to obtain their data. You know, if there's two vehicles in a crash and they both record data, it would be really beneficial to have both sets of data. Next, contact a forensic expert and obtain permission from your insured to collect the data. We'll go on site, pull the data right away. If you'd like us to collect data from a third-party vehicle, let us know once you've got the permission from them, and we'll go on site and collect data as well. Other important things we need is lost details. Naturally, you'll provide us with a notice of lost details, which will include an overview of what took place. But if you send us statements and photos that you have on file, this is great information that we can validate with the data. I've got some case studies you might find interesting. I'd like to go through a few of them with you. You might see how the EDR data extraction is applied to real-life cases. Case study number 1 was a coach bus. So I was asked to investigate this loss involving a new coach bus that drove onto a cement highway divider. It drove right into a cement barrier. The driver said both his steering and brakes failed, which caused him to drive into the cement wall. I examined the mechanical components of the suspension and steering and brakes, and I found no faults. It was a new bus. I then downloaded the EDR data from the engine controller and found that the driver made no attempt to slow the vehicle down. He never lifted his foot off the fuel. He made no attempt to avoid the crash. In fact, the engine was under load, which means the driver was actually trying to gain speed on the on-ramp to the highway. The client determined from the interpreted data that the driver was likely texting and driving. This positioned the client to avoid a costly liability claim against them for not maintaining their bus. Case study number 2 is another coach bus, different scenario here though. This particular case was really interesting because I was asked to review data that was already downloaded by a mechanic. There was no other information other than the raw data taken from the engine controller. Our client wanted me to verify that this data was accurate. The lost details were, during a snowstorm, municipal plows on the highway left a snowbank across the exit ramp. Several cars attempting to cross that snowbank ended up in a collision, unfortunately. Our client's bus drove into those vehicles, which caused the bus to flip. And our client was approached with many third-party claims as there were multiple injuries. At face value, though, the data showed that the bus was traveling 85 kilometers an hour, which really didn't seem that bad for the conditions that there was. There was some snow on the road, but it seemed like a responsible speed. Our client was mounting a defense against those claims and thought it would be a good idea to have a forensic expert review the data and provide an opinion. After a physical evaluation of the actual bus, I found something interesting. There was a discrepancy between the components of the bus and what was programmed into the EDR. The gearing of the bus was falsely programmed, causing the speed of the bus to be misrepresented. And once we crunched the numbers and interpreted the differential, tires, and transmission data, it turned out that the bus was actually traveling 133 kilometers an hour, not 85, on snow. The reason why someone would fudge the system, because drivers want to go faster than their speed governors allow. So they change the gear programming, which tricks the EDR into thinking the vehicle is traveling at a speed slower than it really is. And this permits the driver to drive as fast as he wants. Fortunately, the audit trails in the data, which you see on your screen, it's a sample of one, similar to the one that you see, provided the laptop ID and the mechanic's identification responsible for the false programming to allow the bus to bypass its governed speed, which I imagine was a great help for our client. It was also a good thing that our client got their hands on the data and analyzed it, because it gave them a clear indication of their liability and guided them in their settlement strategy. Had they not known this information, they might have been surprised by somebody like myself on the other side, and needless to say, that's not the side of negotiations you want to be on. Case study 3. This is a tragedy that we hear more of these days, and it's a sad story, but there was a senior citizen who unfortunately got confused and entered the off-ramp of a major highway and was traveling the wrong way. Unfortunately, efforts from oncoming traffic to warn the driver were unsuccessful, and he fatally met a semi-truck head-on. The truck fleet and insurer had the insight to have me examine and document the truck and download the data. The information was saved and stored. A year later, the truck company and their insurer received a claim from the family of the deceased, accusing the truck driver of failing to avoid or attempting to avoid the collision. Well, the insurance company contacted us, and we interpreted the previously downloaded data. Then we complemented that EDR information with a road survey, mapping the truck's travel speed and distance backwards from the point of impact. We were able to show that the truck driver applied the brakes as soon as the approaching car was in a line of sight. Our report was compelling, and the claim was withdrawn. Case study 4, truck fire. So in this case, an adjuster received a claim from a semi-truck owner that said he was pulling a loaded trailer on a major highway when all of a sudden he smelled smoke. He said the engine caught fire and burned the truck, the trailer, and all its contents. He also helped the insurance company by having his own tractor trailer towed to his remote yard and filed a claim a week later after the reported date of the loss. After the insurance company moved the vehicle to a secure yard, they asked me to investigate. The truck was badly damaged. However, I noticed the EDR on the engine survived, so I recovered it and remotely extracted the data on a bench. The photograph on your screen is actually the actual extraction process of that burned EDR. And even though there was no crash event, the EDR recorded the last stop and data leading up to it. I found it pretty interesting that the truck was only traveling about 40 kilometers an hour. It also accelerated, stopped, moved without touching the brake or fuel pedals, and no engine load. It only idled. Even more interesting is that the clutch was depressed the entire time. This information indicated that something other than the engine was moving the vehicle. I wondered about the clutch and decided to examine the transmission. My findings were the transmission was broken. That's why the clutch was pushed in. In short, we were able to determine that the insured statement was false and that the truck was likely towed to a location and burned. This is our last case study. No, this is our second to last case study. Since I have a background in large diesel engines, I was involved in a multi-million-dollar loss where a large standby generator, diesel generator, failed in a municipal building. The claim had dragged on for a long time. Several parties involved in the installation were pointing fingers at each other, but it seemed like there was a piece of the puzzle missing. Data from the engine had been downloaded at the time of the failure. However, the data seemed to be either dismissed or seen as irrelevant or misunderstood. After analyzing the data and the daily log of the engine activity, because some of these do have this type of detail where they'll log every activity per 2-hour intervals through the history of 2 months sometimes, a major mechanical failure and patch job was revealed when compared to recorded fault codes. After we dug deeper into the service history, a likely failure was determined, which provided a successful defense for my client. This is the last case study. It's about a brand new car. And we received a call from an insurer advising us that their insured had just gotten into an accident in a brand new 2-week-old car. She was enjoying her new car, traveling down a 2-lane highway in the afternoon. The light ahead turned yellow, and she applied the brake to begin stopping. That's when she said the vehicle had a mind of its own and wouldn't stop. She drove into a pole to avoid the intersection and totaled her brand new car. The insurance company found her insistent that something was wrong with the car and that she was a good driver. The adjuster asked me to examine the car for defects, and I recommended that we download the data. That might help explain the event. The mechanical components of the car were fine. In fact, they were still new. The data showed that she did, in fact, release the fuel pedal and applied the brake well before the event, just like she said. However, the engine load increased as the engine worked to maintain the vehicle's road speed. In essence, she was fighting the engine with her brake. Since there was no mechanical links to the throttle in newer vehicles, we concluded that a defect in the vehicle's logic system led to the crash. that's the end of my case studies, but I'd like to talk to you about cost because I'm sure that's buzzing around your head right now. We do have a standard equipment charge of $250 to offset the cost of software expenses and tooling on heavy trucks. On passenger vehicles, it's $150. And similar to any other investigation, some expenses are variable due to the location of the vehicle and other conditions that are unique to the case, like how much reconstruction of the wiring is needed and how severe the damage is. And on some data extractions require reconstruction of the main part of where the EDR is itself, especially on heavy trucks. We may also extract data from multiple EDRs on trucks, so more time can go into some extractions than others. Some are quick. Generally speaking, data extractions with mechanical inspections can vary between $2,500 and $5,000. If you would like to have a chat with me, whether it's about retaining us or not, or just reviewing the file, please feel free to call me anytime. I have those types of discussions with clients every day, free of charge.
Great, thanks, Russ. So that leads us to our Q&A portion of the presentation. So you could see on the GoToWebinar panel on your screen, there's a little question section. So you could submit your questions at this point. I'm just going to open it up myself here. All right. So all questions are going to be anonymous, as I'd mentioned before, unless you want your name to be identified or your company. So just indicate in the beginning of your question your name and your company name. First question, let me just open it up here. All it says is, "Hey, Russ." All right, so that's from, it seems like a friend of yours. Okay.
I have lots of friends.
Okay, next question is a vehicle EDR fire resistant?
So they are not fire resistant. The idea that it would resist fire is, it does have shock resistance to it, but it is a metal box, and inside is printed circuits with solder. So it doesn't like fire. I will say, though, that there are many times when I look at, especially trucks, but passenger vehicles as well, if it's an engine compartment fire, then the fire, because the EDR is in the passenger compartment, and a lot of times melted vinyl and plastics will land on top of where the EDR is, they do survive. It's never 100%, and they're definitely not fire resistant.
Okay, great. Next question here is there a concise list or a resource to find out which make or model or year you can get EDR data from? I understand that some manufacturers do not allow access. And part two, second question here is there an issue with consent to obtain EDR information? Do we need the permission from an insured to obtain this information? Which I think Kyle from TD had mentioned his name and his company. Thanks, Kyle, for coming out. Yes, so Russ had mentioned that you do need permission from the insured or the owner of the vehicle in order for us to proceed and try to extract data. So the first part of this question is there a list of or a resource of make, models, and so on from which we could obtain that information?
So the easy answer for that is on September 1st, 2014, the U.S. Congress made it mandatory that EDRs record 15 key points, and that data is publicly available through the standard SAE hookup connection protocol. The list prior to that is voluntary. So you have some companies like General Motors and Ford that have had available data since the late 90s, And then you have some that started coming on board in 2006. So it's a hodgepodge of start dates. Many of them, knowing that the rules were going to be changed, started implementing in 2011, 2012. After 2014, it became a mandatory standard, but even at that, some manufacturers are pushing back with excuses of why some models don't have it or won't have it for another year. But it is a very good, it looks very good to have access to this data, anything in the newer realm of vehicles. So most of the vehicles, I would say 2006 and newer, will have it, and it is a very specific list that has to be looked up almost vehicle by vehicle prior to September 2014.
Great, thanks, Russ. Next question. I've seen situations where a report can't be extracted from an EDR in a truck because of a previous attempt to extract it after a collision, and the attempt was made using a different system's reader module. How do we ensure that the correct system is used to extract the data? Is there a single analysis system that can read all EDRs?
Haha, so lies the crux and why not many firms have ventured into this. Each controller, because they are not mandated by the government, there is an SAE standard waiting in the wings, but the government has not even entertained enforcing that into law. Each engine manufacturer has their own specific software. It's at a high cost per year to maintain, and there is no single point of software that's going to get the data out. There are many softwares out there that say they can talk to fault codes on any vehicle, but to get the, I hate to call it crash data, but the hard stop reports that are locked in for so many cycles, you need the actual specific manufacturer's software, and that's where we've made this large investment.
Great. Thanks, Russ. Do any of the EDRs in heavy trucks provide timestamp information for various pre-impact parameters, i.e. vehicle speed, brake switch status, etc.?
Yes, they do. So once the recording is time-stamped at the time of the event, depending on the manufacturer, say Detroit engines will go back a minute 43 seconds, and the timestamp starts at that point, and then the recording is every half a second past that, sometimes once a second, depending on the year and the software level. Right. So just expanding on that, part of our forensic process is to verify the current time and date to our laptop time and date, to the software time and date, and to the truck's time and date, because we can find there are variances in there that can come under scrutiny later in the case.
All right, next question. Are you able to pull data on whether a standard transmission vehicle was slowing down by gearing down, like not braking?
I think I would say yes, because what we're going to read, and we're talking about data that is locked in due to a crash. So the engine load is extracted, and the fuel pedal and the clutch pedal, and with those put together, if you gear down, if you're trying to slow your truck down with your transmission, it's going to force the engine load through the roof. That's because that's what's actually trying to stop the truck or slow the truck, is the engine load. And so reading those and interpreting them in the total picture of the event, it certainly should be able to give us an idea whether he was using the transmission to gear down.
Great. Next question, what does the process of extracting and interpreting cost on average? So you had mentioned that, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a variable. There's only one base price, and that's the equipment charge that we put in to recover some of our high costs of the software and training.
So on a truck, it costs $250, and on normal vehicles, passenger vehicles, it's $150.
Exactly.
Next question. What studies have been done to prove that EDRs are 100% accurate?
That's an excellent question. And so I do belong to a heavy truck vehicle data group, and that group monitors those studies. And we have several examples where even to the 0.2 of a second, the data has been analyzed to see what reaction time the electronics have from the time the pedal was actually pushed till the time it reported to the EDR, and how accurate these things are. And the error rates are listed, so, and they're listed by manufacturer. So again, it's all manufacturer specific, but we do have data. So if challenged, we bring that data into the analysis, and challenged on it, we have those studies that have been done.
Great. What data is lost if a vehicle was restarted and driven after an event is recorded? Okay,
so as far as a passenger vehicle, nothing, because once the airbags are deployed, that is locked in, and I'm sure many on this call would agree. I see familiar names on here. But as far as heavy trucks, so some record 2 events, some record 3, and we're talking about hard stop events. So if there's a hard stop event, i.e. the crash, so that is recorded as the first event. And then if there's a crash after that, the first one is pushed back and the second is recorded. If there are continuous events, hard stop events, each one of those is pushed back. So if we're talking about a crash that disabled a vehicle, the idea that it's been driven and then overwrites that is very unlikely. What does get erased and overwritten is a last stop recording. So if the crash happens, there's a hard stop recording made, but then a last stop is redundant at the same time. And say we turn the key on because we're going to maneuver it onto a tow truck. As soon as the wheel moves, it records another last stop. So we lose that last stop data. In the case of the fire, we didn't have to worry about that because the fire burned all the ignition wires, and we didn't have any problem with deciding the vehicle didn't go anywhere after that because there was no way to power the controller up. But in a crash, there is a risk of losing data if the key is turned back on.
Great. Okay. What data is lost, or sorry, that's the last one, excuse me. Okay, can the data be interpreted more than one way? Would it be prudent to have another assessment if we're being presented with data from a third party? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. There is a face value similar to the bus rollover we looked at as a case study. There's the face value of the data, and you may find somebody run with that type of thing. It's how much detail you can provide about the vehicle that will scrutinize and verify the data. So going back to the previous question, how accurate it is, you bring those studies in to show how accurate the EDRs are recording for that model year, and you look at all the details, including not just the tire size that's printed on the tire, but it would be prudent to actually make a measurement of the tire and do math to figure out the rotations per mile. So when you're trying to be as specific as possible, then you'll have that data to back up your findings.
Great. Are these devices found in other vehicles such as motorcycles, snowmobiles, or ATVs? This question's from Paul from Crawford & Company. Thanks for coming out, Paul.
So I don't know of any motorcycles or ATVs that would carry this. There are controllers, obviously, that run electronic features on these vehicles. I will say, though, the EDR information we're talking about, you will find on electronically controlled diesel standby generators to analyze failures. You'll find them on excavation equipment. Caterpillars and other types of excavation will have multiple controllers measuring multiple data. Crane failures have intense amounts of data to record on what's happening with them. So to get data out of other failures other than crash, if you're talking about heavy equipment, mining equipment, construction, boats, if they're electronically driven engines and we have a large piston failure in a marine craft, you may want to look at getting data. And not just relying on the service personnel, because they're only focused on the performance of the vehicle or the performance of the engine. To have a forensic failure analysis of that data compared to the engine itself may be prudent, like in the generator failure that we spoke about.
Interesting. So another question coming in, do motorcycles have EDRs as well? So you answer that question, right?
Yeah.
When did EDRs become common in vehicles?
Yeah, so we touched on this. The fact is that EDRs, they became commonplace in vehicles for GM and Ford back in the 90s, and they were recording this data. They found it valuable to their own research, I'm sure, but as we go along through imports, and the more imports that came into the country, those rules were, it wasn't commonplace. And so the Congress, the U.S. Congress, and I'm sorry that they seem to be the driving force here, they saw enough. There's actually a report that talks about several good reasons to have this data, and two of the main focus reasons to have data were to analyze crashes and to provide insurance companies and the courts with factual data instead of having opinions thrown at each other from across the table.
Okay, next question. What happens when another party refuses access to their computer data? And that's from Rick from Nortrax.
So Rick, that really is a legal question. I mean, you're posing a question that if a litigation shows interest in a claim, then that the process is that the other claimant's got to indicate that you're an interested party through the civil litigation. There's ASTM standards regarding that, and I'm sure that anybody in the legal arena would be able to answer that question better than me, but in our practice, we simply don't take data we don't have permission for.
Great. Thanks for submitting your question, Rick. Next question. If the car is still being driven, how long will the information regarding the crash even be retained for?
Again, if the data is due to an airbag deployment, first off, you're probably not driving the car. But if it is a deployment event, it's never going away. There are I think there's 250 key cycles that will erase a data event that was a non-deployment event. So if somebody gets in a car and turns the key on 250 times, whatever that equates to in how many weeks, then on the 250th key cycle, it'll erase that recording.
Okay, so that actually connects with the next question, which says, is there a limit to the number of events an EDR can record? Does it ever reset and record over old data?
Okay, well, as far as passenger cars, that was the answer there. As far as trucks, yes, hard stops, and it's dependent on the manufacturer. So, for instance, Caterpillar will record 2, Detroit will record 3. So if there's any more than 3 events, if the driver's tailgating and he's causing hard stops in a routine manner, they're going to continue to override and overwrite each other.
I guess the short answer to that question, I would say, is if ever you come across something like that, give Russ a call and ask him. I think it really depends, like by each circumstance, of course. Can EDRs tell me if a factory key was used to last operate the vehicle? That's from Rob at AMA. Thanks for coming out, Rob.
Wow. So I'll answer it by not answering that particular question. I will say that there are many manufacturers now, especially somebody like BMW, that their key fobs record data. So whether they intend it to be a convenience for the person dropping their car off for service, the fact is they simply bring their key fob into the service department, they drop it onto a pickup pad, and the computer picks up the data out of the key. So I can't answer exactly. I don't think the EDR, I've never seen a recording on there that tells us which key it was used.
Okay. Are the EDRs in all vehicles or just newer vehicles? That's Ellen from Crawford & Company.
So like we've gone over, you know what, a lot of these questions is simply, I'm afraid you'll have to give me a call. I don't mind talking. I'm nice on the phone usually. So simply give me a call, because the vehicles are so diverse in when their start date was to record data. I will say that, again, after September 2014, it was a mandatory requirement in the U.S. and which are followed here in Canada.
Yeah, so that relates to the next question. Are all vehicles now equipped with EDRs?
It is a mandate from September 1st, 2014.
Okay. Thanks, Ellen, for submitting your question. Can we as insurers take out the box and give it to origin and cause? Does that hurt the chain of events?
Evidence? No, it doesn't.
Or evidence, excuse me.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt the chain of evidence. It'd be obviously better and easier scrutinized if a photograph of the box in the vehicle was, came with it. What's more important is that we verify that all the parameters that are expected in that box, like the tire size and even gear ratios, if they've been changed, that stuff is verified somehow. So if you just give us the box, we can just give you the data, but you can be scrutinized by somebody saying, what size tires were on it? Was it actually going that speed, or is it now, is the information really no good because we don't know those details? So I would caution, if you do document the vehicle really, really well and give us all the questions we need, sure, we'll download it and tell you what you have.
Great. And of course, in the event that you do that, make sure that you have a very high standard, very high qualified chain of custody form attached to it. I think that's the best way to kind of control opposing arguments, trying to poke at the quality of the evidence and if there was any sort of spoliation of evidence. All right, so that kind of concludes the time that we have to complete or to go through all the questions. There are several that we haven't been able to get to. Don't worry, folks. Russ and I will follow up with you personally to make sure that we answer your questions. And thank you so much. I think this is the most questions we've ever received. So thank you again for that. I just wanted to go very quickly over who Origin and Cause is, just so that you guys get a feel of what our services are, in case you haven't heard of us or haven't used us or just want an update. So who is Origin and Cause? So we were established over 24 years ago. Actually, our 25th anniversary is coming up this year. We're very excited. We're the largest forensic engineering and fire investigation firm in Canada, with actually 11 locations now. We just opened up a new office in Edmonton. It seems like this was my, I did an update right before I had made this slide before the presentation, but we have 11 locations now with experts all across the country. So Edmonton is a new office which has opened as of last week. We're very excited about that. Our services include fire and explosion investigation. We have a K9 unit. You see there smoke going through an investigation to try to find some sort of accelerant if an accelerant had been used. We have structural engineering services. We have electrical engineers that look at electrical failures. You can see here in this photo Mazen Habash, who's the president of the organization, looking at an alarm system panel, which he is a specialist in specifically doing alarm system analysis. Next, we have the mechanical engineering unit, which Russ is a part of. You can see one of our engineers, Michelle Bradley, in elbows deep in a truck there. We have a materials and metallurgical engineering unit. You have Dina Matei there looking at some sort of, I guess, some plumbing connection or something there. And we have a chemical engineering unit. You have our vice president, Richard Courin, in this photo, and he's looking at a couple of chemicals. I just want to encourage you all to go to our website. We have a lot of great resources. You can see on the left side there is like a menu about us, our services, our experts. You can look up various experts. You can pull their CVs directly from there. We have a testimonials section where clients, several hundreds of clients have submitted testimonials. And the resources section, which is what I really want to point out to you guys, that's where we post all of our webinars, our articles, white papers, etc. So if ever you're looking for any new resources, including webinars, click on resources, and from there you'll see blog posts and webinars and articles, etc. I'm really excited to announce our next webinar, which is taking place April 27th. You guys are the first to hear about it, so you get the scoop. It's about oil spills. The title is Residential Oil Spills, a Messy Business. It's taking place April 27th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And really, we will be speaking about oil tanks. It's when an oil tank leaks or spills, there's a very short window of opportunity in which you can collect the necessary information. So it's really critical to have a strategy in place. Obviously, oil spills are very complex claims, and there's so many stakeholders involved. So there's obviously more opportunities for the scene to get contaminated, or even just issues to arise because of the complexity of those types of claims. So we encourage our clients to make sure that they are well equipped ahead of time to understand what questions to ask, what type of information to collect immediately, what things that they should do and what things they shouldn't do when an oil spill claim comes in, and develop that response plan and put a response plan in place so that they're well equipped on the onset of an incident or in the event of an incident. So from the moment you're notified of an oil spill or a leak, you must react quickly to mitigate the loss while you're trying to balance the need to getting the appropriate experts out to document the scene and the evidence. So it's very a tricky balance, but we have this 1 hour free webinar where our forensic engineer, Dinu Matei, who is a materials and metallurgical engineer, as well as a guest speaker, Adam Grant, who's a partner at McCaig Borlaug. They'll both be discussing oil spill claims, both from the forensic perspective as well as the legal perspective. And we're going to address things like, types of oil tanks, like a 101 on different types of oil tanks, most common types and causes of spills, the do's and don'ts in an oil spill investigation, steps to take at the onset of subrogation process, and also litigation strategies. So we recommend insurance adjusters attend, as well as lawyers, brokers, anyone that wants to learn about oil spills and how to manage those types of claims are most welcome. We encourage you guys to share that information once you guys get an invite. And yeah, so we actually will have a questionnaire popping up on your screen once you guys close this webinar. If you could answer those questions, I think there are only 5 questions. It'd probably take you about 10 seconds to answer. Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get feedback from people to find out how our presentations are doing. How is the quality of our presentation? How's the quality of the presenter and the content? Also, we want to find out what other topics you guys want to hear about. So you'll please submit that feedback, and the last question on that survey will be, do you want us to sign you up for the next webinar, which is the oil spills? So if you want us to sign up for you, hit yes, and we will make sure to get you signed up. Lastly, we will be sending completion certificates to all of you guys that have attended. We will be sending those within probably 48 hours. So if you're in a group and you didn't log in personally, but you guys are all under one login, please send me an email. So you could send it to webinar@origin-n-cause.com, and just send me a list of names and email addresses, and I'll make sure that I get completion certificates out to all of you guys. Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes the webinar. We appreciate you all coming out and taking this hour to sit with us and chat. You have Russ's contact information there. Please feel free to call us at any time. All right, folks, have a great day.